Jeep quietly revised a critical transmission cooling component on JL Wranglers and Gladiators in 2021, and almost nobody knows it happened. If you own a JL or JT with ZF automatic transmission, this is something you need to know, because it can affect cooling performance, long-term reliability, and how you service the transmission. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is David. In this video, we're breaking down what changed, why it matters, and how to check which version your Jeep has. The change was to the heat exchanger on the ZF transmission. The heat exchanger is the component that regulates the transmission fluid temperature, and most owners don't realize that there are actually two separate thermal circuits controlling how the transmission heats up and cools down. Before we move on, a quick update on what videos are coming up next. If you're finding this kind of detailed technical Jeep content helpful, hit the like and consider subscribing. It really helps the channel and supports more deep dive videos like this. I've got upcoming videos on ZF8 transmission fluid alternatives and specs, how to change your coolant according to the service manual, a better oil change method, and a GPS theft-resistant roof rack bin mount. And if there's something you want to see covered or want to see first, drop a comment below. Most people only know about the first thermal circuit, which is the heat exchange through the engine's coolant. That's where the transmission fluid and engine coolant pass through the heat exchanger, allowing heat to move between them. But there is a second cooling circuit that almost nobody talks about. And to really understand how this system works and what Jeep changed, I'm going to crawl under the Jeep and show you where the heat exchanger lives and how the circuits are routed. Then we'll step inside and walk through exactly how everything works using the factory service manual. All right, let's get under the Jeep and take a look at the heat exchanger. Okay, so looking under the Jeep, this is the front of the Jeep on this side. Okay, and the heat exchanger is right there on the transmission, right over there. Let me see if I can focus on it. And that's the unit that basically regulates the heat. And it's on the side of transmission here. Here's the transmission pan, just to give you a reference. And the oil pan is up here under the Jeep. Here's the factory service manual diagram that shows the two separate circuits used to manage transmission temperature. Both circuits pass through this heat exchanger, which is mounted on the side of transmission as we saw earlier, between the transmission and the drive shaft. The blue lines represent the coolant circuit. Coolant flows from the radiator hoses at the front of the vehicle into the heat exchanger. Transmission fluid also flows through the heat exchanger, but the two fluids never mix. Heat is transferred internally, allowing the coolant to either warm or cool the transmission fluid depending on the temperature. The red lines represent the second circuit, which is the transmission fluid cooling loop and contains transmission fluid. Transmission fluid exits the transmission, flows forward to a dedicated transmission cooler near the radiator. It is then cooled by airflow and then returns to the transmission as cooled transmission fluid. This system isn't just heating or cooling the transmission, it's actively deciding when to do each and how aggressively. At least that was true up until mid-2021. And by aggressively, I mean through a thermostat built directly into the heat exchanger. On the red circuit, the circuit that carries only transmission fluid. That thermostat kept transmission fluid from flowing to the front cooler until the fluid warmed up and reached a certain temperature. Once it opened up, full cooling was allowed. On paper, that's actually smart design. Faster warm-up in cold weather, then full cooling once temperatures rise. Sounds great. That is, until that thermostat sticks closed. When that happens, transmission flow to the front cooler is severely restricted, and transmission temperatures can skyrocket very quickly. Enough owners experience overheating and in some cases transmission damage, or full warranty replacements, that Jeep eventually scrapped the thermostat entirely and replaced the whole assembly with the full-time flow heat exchanger. No announcement, no recall, no press release. So when did this change actually occur? And after looking at Internet archives, all signs point to a March-April 2021 transition. That means if your JL Wrangler or Gladiator was built before mid-2021, this is absolutely something you should verify. This wasn't a minor update. This was a silent fix for a real failure point. There are two ways to tell which heat exchanger you have. First, by checking part numbers. Here I list the old and new part numbers on the screen. Second, by visual inspection. If your heat exchanger has a thermostat housing or a raised boss, like the one circled in red on the left, that's the older design. If it doesn't, like the unit shown on the right, you have the newer full flow version. Will the newer heat exchanger work as a retrofit? It should, but I want to be honest, I haven't done a hands-on retrofit yet, so I can't guarantee it. There are a lot of factors here. There could be issue with bracket compatibility or something else, especially if you modified your Jeep. And speaking of modified Jeeps, it is important to note that both the old and new designs have known clearance challenges with some lift kits and especially some aftermarket drive shafts. Just as an example, here is a picture of JE Real drive shaft, which uses larger universal joints hitting the heat exchanger during off-roading and causing damage. So if you're building your Jeep for real off-road use, this is absolutely an area you want to inspect closely. Alright, before I wrap this up, I want to acknowledge the folks over on the JL Wrangler forum. That's where I first learned about this issue. Thanks to everyone there for sharing their insights and real-world experiences. It helped point me in the right direction to dig into the service manual and part revisions. This video is really about connecting those dots and putting everything in one place. Thanks for watching. Keep an eye on your transmission temperatures, especially if you have an earlier JL, and I'll see you in the next video.